I stood frozen by the wooden frame of Grandma's kitchen door during her 70th birthday party, when those words drifted into my ears, words that would change my life forever. Haley is so much stronger and more ambitious than Layla. You need someone like that by your side, my mother Evelyn said in the old tiled kitchen, her voice light, as if she were discussing a pie recipe instead of my future. I gripped my glass of water tightly, the cold seeping into my skin unnoticed. My boyfriend? Tyler? The man I'd loved for 3 years and thought would propose before Christmas? Was standing right there in front of her, his face stiff, his eyes full of confusion. But worst of all, he didn't argue. He didn't defend me. Haley just got promoted to head of marketing in Denver. She knows how to hustle. And Layla? Mom shrugged. An elementary school art teacher, wasting time painting pictures no one buys. My heart clenched like a fist. I had always been proud of my work, proud of helping children discover the world through colors, but to my mother it was nothing but failure. Tyler hesitated. He stared at the floor as if looking for answers in the cracks between the old tiles. I don't know, Mrs. Evelyn. Layla and I have been together a long time. And what has that gotten you? A relationship going nowhere, Mom interrupted, her tone flat, like she was closing a deal. You and Haley have the same drive, the same goals. You'll go far together. I forced myself to turn away before they noticed me. The glass trembled in my hand, water spilling over the rim like the tears I refused to shed. After that party, everything changed. Tyler started mentioning Haley more and more in conversations, praising her for running charity marathons, for landing big contracts at work. I smiled stiffly, swallowing the growing ache every time her name came up. Our dates became rare, replaced by busy evenings, emergency meetings, last-minute business trips. I began wondering if I was imagining things. Was I just being overly sensitive? Was I being jealous of my own sister? Then one Friday night, while I was preparing a surprise dinner for Tyler, his favorite spaghetti, my phone rang. It was Mia, my best friend, the one who always saw what I tried to ignore. Are you free? She said urgently. I'm at Downtown Cafe, and Layla, you need to come. I didn't ask why. Deep down, I already knew this wasn't just a casual coffee date. 15 minutes later, I pushed open the cafe door. Through the fogged-up glass, I saw them. Haley sitting close to Tyler, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed. And him, the man who once looked at me like I was his whole world, now gazing at Haley with that same tenderness? I stood frozen in the middle of the cafe. No words came out. I turned and walked out, letting the cold night air sweep away the humiliation roaring inside me. That night, lying in bed with the shattered glow of the ceiling light above me, I realized I hadn't just lost my boyfriend. I had lost my faith in the beautiful things I used to believe in. I don't even remember clearly how I survived the days after that. Everything blurred. Short conversations, half-eaten meals, sleepless nights staring at the ceiling. Tyler kept texting, kept calling, still playing the doting boyfriend for appearance's sake. But I knew his heart wasn't mine anymore. I didn't need proof. My gut screamed it every time I saw Haley flashing her sweet smile at Tyler during family gatherings. Yet part of me, some foolish part, still clung to hope. Until that one night. A drizzly Saturday evening, I decided to stop by Tyler's apartment without warning. I brought a homemade apple pie, the one he said always tasted like home during his toughest days. I thought maybe, just maybe, those simple memories could save us. The door was unlocked. Strange, since Tyler was always meticulous about locking up. I stepped inside, calling his name, but only silence answered me. Then I heard giggles coming from the bedroom, a familiar laugh mixed with another voice, Haley's. I stood frozen in the hallway, still holding the warm pie. Something inside me shattered into 1,000 pieces as I pushed open the bedroom door. There they were. Haley, her blonde hair tousled, curled up in Tyler's arms. Their eyes locked, full of a love I had never truly received. The pie slipped from my hands, crashing onto the floor. They both looked up, not with panic or guilt, but with irritation at being interrupted. Haley casually pulled the sheet over herself, a smirk playing on the face my mother always called perfect. Layla, Tyler stammered, sounding like a boy caught sneaking out. Don't, I cut him off, my voice eerily calm. Don't insult my intelligence with excuses. Haley crossed her arms unbothered. It was time you found out anyway, she said, her words slicing like ice. I took a deep breath, forcing back the wave of nausea. How long? I asked, not really wanting the answer. Tyler dropped his gaze. 2 months, he muttered, as if admitting to stealing candy, not betraying 3 years of love. Haley smiled smugly like she'd just won a contest. We've been together since Grandma's party, she said. Probably earlier if Mom hadn't told us to wait. Hearing Mom roll off Haley's tongue was another slap in the face. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Everything was crystal clear. I turned away, not wanting to fall apart in a place that once felt like home. Tyler called after me, but I didn't stop. The next morning I faced my mother in Grandma's kitchen. The smell of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, but it couldn't cover the coldness between us. She looked up from her tea, completely unbothered. I heard, she said casually, like commenting on the weather. You need to toughen up, Layla. Not everything is a tragedy. I clenched my fists. You knew, I said. And you chose their side. I didn't choose anything, she shrugged. Haley has a future. She needs a man with ambition. And you, she paused, searching for a gentler word, then sighed. You're a dreamer, Layla, an art teacher at a public school. You need someone simple, not a guy like Tyler. Each word landed like a slow, deliberate knife. So in your eyes, I rasped. I was never enough. She placed her teacup down, looking almost bored. I just want what's best for you. But if you can't face reality, there's nothing more I can do. I stepped back, feeling strangely light. In that moment I realized I didn't need validation from someone who never valued what I held dear. I slammed the trunk shut, my heart as heavy as the gray clouds blanketing the sky. Behind me was the town where I was born, a place filled with sweet memories and wounds that never fully healed. Ahead, a dusty trail led me away. Away from Mom, away from Haley, away from Tyler. Away from everything that had crushed my heart. But I had met Chicago appeared on the horizon after nearly 8 exhausting hours of driving. The city was vast, unfamiliar, loud, and cold. But I wasn't afraid. I had nothing left to lose. I rented a tiny room in an old apartment building on the west side, where the wooden stairs creaked under every footstep and the hallways smelled like decades-old bleach. I just needed a place to start over. That was enough. My small savings would barely cover a few weeks if I was extremely careful. I searched for jobs everywhere, knocking on the doors of shops and tiny offices with a resume printed at the copy shop down the street. Every rejection made me clench my fists tighter and remind myself not to give up. One freezing morning I spotted a flyer taped outside the cafe where I worked nights. Administrative assistant wanted, Stratton & Co., investment firm, no experience necessary, hard workers willing to learn preferred. I jotted down the address by hand because my old phone's GPS had long since given out. The Stratton & Co. office was in a small glass-fronted building downtown, reflecting the weak winter sunlight. I was greeted by a slim woman with thin-rimmed glasses named Caroline from HR. After a few simple questions about office skills, she offered a polite smile. We actually filled that position this morning, she said, flipping through my paperwork. My heart dropped to the floor. But before I could leave, she hesitated. However, there's another opening, personal assistant to one of our investment advisors. It's a bit more intense, but offers room to grow. I nodded immediately, not even waiting to hear the full description. I needed a chance. Any chance. Caroline led me past rows of neat desks to a tiny, paper-cluttered office. A man in his 30s looked up from behind his computer. He wore a light blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his tie slightly askew, looking exhausted, but with a strangely bright spark in his eyes. Patrick Reynolds, he said, standing up to shake my hand. Sorry about the mess. Year-end reports. Better messy than too quiet, I said with a small laugh, feeling some of the tension ease. Patrick asked a few quick questions about handling work under pressure. I answered honestly, telling him about coordinating dozens of kids in a chaotic art class and how I could turn cleaning up into a game. Patrick laughed, a rare, genuine sound. Sounds like you're qualified to manage a mountain of paperwork and me, he joked, a twinkle in his eye that no other interviewer had shown. Minutes later, Caroline returned, looking surprised when Patrick nodded decisively. And she starts Monday. I walked out, holding a piece of paper confirming my new job, clutching it like a lifeline. I never thought I'd find myself in finance. But, for the first time in months, a door was opening. That night, lying on a mattress padded with old blankets, I opened my laptop and started Googling every term I could find about investing, stocks, and financial markets. I scribbled notes into an old notebook, one line at a time, determined not to let Patrick, or anyone else, regret giving me a shot. In a strange city, surrounded by skyscrapers and rushing crowds, I decided I wouldn't just survive. I would rebuild myself from the ruins they left behind. The job at Stratton & Co. wasn't as easy as I hoped. The first days were a blur of financial documents and strange jargon, like wandering through a maze with no way out. Patrick was so busy that some days he only nodded in greeting. But, strangely enough, I didn't feel discouraged. Every morning, seeing the sunlight peek through my tiny window, I reminded myself, this was a chance I earned, not charity. Patrick was a tough boss, sometimes silent to the point of coldness, but he was also the first person who truly listened to my tiny suggestions, whether it was about reorganizing files or optimizing spreadsheets. He never brushed me off or made me feel small. Every nod from him resurrected a piece of my worth. We stayed late more than anyone else in the office. Our takeout dinners went cold on the desk, and the steady typing mixed with the distant hum of Chicago traffic outside. The quiet should have felt empty, but somehow it didn't. It felt like hope. A few months later, Patrick pulled me into a private meeting at a tiny cafe below the building. "I'm seriously thinking about leaving Stratton & Co.," he said, voice low but firm. I almost spilled my coffee. "Are you serious? You're one of their best advisors." Patrick smiled. A tired but determined smile. "Exactly. That's why I can't keep helping corporations that only care about profits. I want to build something different. An investment firm focused on sustainable projects, on people creating lasting value for communities." He paused, his gaze steady. "I want you to come with me, Layla. Not as an assistant anymore. As a partner, someone who sees what I'm trying to build and can help make it real." I froze. Partly because of the shock, partly because of the enormous trust Patrick was placing in me. The kind of trust I had longed for from my family but never received. "But I don't know anything about running a company," I whispered. "You know how to create order from chaos," Patrick said without hesitation. "You see potential where others don't." I gripped my coffee cup, torn between fear and excitement. I had run from a whole town to find myself. Maybe it was finally time to stop running and start building. "Okay," I exhaled. "Where do we start?" We started from nothing. No office, no employees, no spare funds. Patrick put up all his savings and I scraped the last dollars from my bank account. We named the company Everest Capital Partners, symbolizing our vision, not to conquer heights for ourselves, but to lift sustainable, green businesses toward the future. Our first office was a tiny third-floor room in an ancient building where the AC hummed constantly and the elevator was always broken. Our desks were two battered tables, our chairs borrowed from the cafe downstairs. On the first day, Patrick walked in carrying a box of files, looked around the bare room, and turned to me. "Are you sure about this?" I smiled. For the first time in months, my heart felt light. More sure than I've ever been. The days that followed were endless, non-stop work. I learned how to draft investment proposals, decipher complex financial terms, and set up data systems from scratch. Patrick crisscrossed the city, pitching to investors, sometimes walking away with nothing but a handshake. We lunched on cold sandwiches, drank weak coffee, and ended late nights surrounded by walls plastered with sticky notes. But in all the exhaustion, I felt alive. No more measuring up to someone else's standards. No more whispers of doubt. Here, every effort mattered. And for the first time, I believed I deserved trust. Our second winter in Chicago was brutal, icy winds tearing down the streets. But inside the tiny office of Everest Capital Partners, I felt strangely warm. Work bound Patrick and me in a rhythm only we understood. A glance was enough to know what the other needed. A small gesture could lift a heavy burden. Sometimes, when the only sounds left were typing and the soft whir of the printer, I caught Patrick watching me. And I knew his gaze held more than professional respect. And my heart had changed, too. Quick lunches on street corners, late nights debating contracts under dim lights, heated arguments that ended in exhausted laughter. Every small moment wove itself into something bigger neither of us dared name. Until one March evening, caught in a gentle rain, Patrick and I ducked into a tiny diner near the office. A few worn tables, the smell of pasta, and an old jukebox playing broken songs. We ordered lasagna and a cheap bottle of wine. In the middle of talking about a new contract, Patrick suddenly fell silent, staring at me so long I blushed. "Layla," he said, voice deep and steady. "We built Everest together from nothing. You believed in me when no one else did. And I want to believe in you again. This time, for the rest of my life." I froze as he pulled out a small ring, simple but sparkling in the dim light. "No grand speeches, no fancy setup," Patrick smiled, his eyes full of sincerity that nearly broke me. "Just say yes. Be my wife. Be my partner, not just at work but in everything." I don't remember exactly when I said yes. I just remember the feeling of Patrick sliding the ring onto my finger, like every past heartbreak suddenly had a purpose. We got married 3 months later in a small, warm ceremony at a red brick church outside Chicago. Only a few close friends came. No fancy dresses, no grand party, just pure love and trust. I wore a simple white dress sewn from silk my mother had sent me the year before, the only gift I ever kept. Patrick wore the same gray suit he used for investor pitches. When the pastor asked him if he promised to stand by me through everything, Patrick simply looked at me and said, "With all my heart." After the ceremony, we threw a little celebration at the Everest office, the place that had seen every drop of our early struggles and hopes. Friends toasted us, laughter echoing among piles of paperwork and charts. It was the happiest moment of my life. Married life wasn't a fairy tale. Work was still tough. We still fought over company decisions and collapsed in exhaustion after bad deals. But every time we sat together, pushing aside pride, reminding each other why we started. Not for money, not for glory, but because we believed we could make something better for this world. Patrick always said, "We don't just invest in businesses. We invest in dreams." And every time he said that, I knew we were also investing in our own dream. A dream of a life no one else would ever decide for us again. In a vast cold city like Chicago, I had found my home. Not in luxury mansions or thick financial reports, but in the eyes of the one man who never looked at me to compare, only to love. 6 years after we signed the lease on that tiny first office, Everest Capital had grown beyond anything we imagined. We opened 2 new branches, expanding investments in sustainable businesses across the Midwest. Patrick became a respected name in the green finance world, and I, the one behind the tight operations, slowly became known as the silent architect of this remarkable growth. One April morning, while I was reviewing annual reports, Patrick tapped lightly on my desk. "Layla," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice, "you should see this." I took the folder he handed me and glanced at the bolded headline. "Notice of Asset Sale, Sterling Investment Group," a mid-sized financial company I remembered from a few strategy discussions. "What does this have to do with us?" I asked. Patrick leaned against the edge of my desk, his eyes glinting with mischief. "A steerfly law to a small law firm in Philadelphia 2 years ago, Harper and Hayes, and Harper and Hayes was the company Mark and Haley helped build." I froze for a moment. "And now," Patrick continued, "Sterling is in deep financial trouble. They're being forced to sell off assets to save their core investments. Harper and Hayes is on the urgent sale list." I set the folder down, a flood of complicated emotions rising inside me. "You want to buy them?" I asked slowly. "I want us to buy them," Patrick corrected, his gaze steady. "Strategically, it's a sound move, and it's also a chance for you to close a chapter, if you want." I stayed silent for a long time. Images of Mark and Haley rushed back, the betrayals, the lies, the pitying looks I had once endured. I thought I had let go of it all. But now, facing the opportunity head-on, my heart still tightened. "Let's host a gala," Patrick said, as if reading my mind. "Celebrate Everest's 10th anniversary. A perfect occasion to announce the acquisition. And, if you agree, We'll send personal invitations to your mother, Haley, and Mark. The idea swept through me like a cold wind. Invite them? Not for revenge, but to show them I hadn't just survived what they did to me. I had risen stronger than ever. I nodded, so lightly it surprised even me how calm I felt. Do it, I said, send the invitations. 3 weeks later, I stood in the fitting room of a boutique in West Loop, gazing at my reflection in a deep navy evening gown, the elegant cut accentuating every curve. My hair was softly curled, grazing my shoulders. The woman in the mirror was no longer the trembling girl who had once packed her life into a suitcase during a pouring Philadelphia night. She was someone new, strong, composed, no longer seeking anyone's approval. The gala was held on the rooftop event space of the building we had just purchased. The entire Chicago skyline stretched beyond the towering glass walls, city lights shimmering like an endless river of stars. Patrick stood beside me, calm and steady, holding my hand as the first guests arrived. Investors, strategic partners, media representatives. All of them buzzing, elegant, lively. And then, through the crowd, I saw them. My mother, still proud in a cream silk dress. Haley, beautiful but sharper now, her arm casually linked with Mark's, whose once confident swagger had clearly faded. The three of them stood awkwardly, scanning the glittering room for familiar faces they couldn't find. I didn't move. I didn't rush. I wanted them to realize it on their own, realize who was standing at the center of all this. Patrick leaned close, whispering in my ear, his voice laced with pride. This is your world, Layla. They're just visitors now. I squeezed his hand gently, eyes never leaving the three figures from my past. It was time for the past to face the present. Soft jazz floated from the live band tucked in the corner, warm golden light washing over the white-clothed tables where champagne flutes sparkled in guests' hands. I stood beside Patrick, his hand resting lightly at my waist, a simple, firm gesture. I saw them, my mother, Haley, and Mark, freeze when they spotted us. My mother's face flickered with visible confusion and surprise. Haley tightened her grip on Mark's arm, her lips pressed into a thin line. Patrick didn't rush. He extended his hand, inviting me to step onto the small stage at the center, where a microphone was already waiting. I walked forward, each step steady, feeling every pair of eyes turn toward me, not with pity, not with judgment, but with recognition. Patrick began the speech, his voice steady and confident. He spoke about Everest Capital's journey, about the tireless work, about the dream of building a finance world focused on sustainability rather than short-term profits. Then, in front of hundreds of guests, he turned toward me, his voice rich with emotion. Everest Capital stands strong today because of Layla, not just a co-founder, but the soul behind every plan, every strategy we are proud of. The room erupted in applause, a tidal wave of sound. I squeezed Patrick's hand, overwhelmed not by pride alone, but by a deep sense of freedom from the past that once weighed me down. When the main program ended, guests broke into smaller groups, chatting, sipping drinks, enjoying the soft background music. I was speaking with a major investor from New York when my mother approached, Haley and Mark trailing silently behind her. Layla, my mother said, her voice unusually sweet, her heavily made-up face stretching into a half-hearted smile. You look very successful. I tilted my head slightly, looking at her calmly. Thank you, Mother. Haley stepped forward, her eyes flickering around the elegant setting. We've heard a lot about Everest Capital, she said, forcing a friendly tone. Very impressive. Mark said nothing, staring into his glass like it might offer an escape. My mother quickly regained her composure. She leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing something important. Layla, I've been thinking. Maybe our family should collaborate. I have some good connections in Philadelphia, potential investors. If you agree, I could help introduce them. I smiled politely, so cold it was almost icy. Thank you for considering Everest. But right now we're focusing on partners who have shared our vision from the very beginning. My mother's eyes darkened for a split second, but she quickly recovered her graceful facade. Of course, I just wanted to help, she said. Haley jumped in, her voice dropping to a calculating tone. Actually, Mark is considering some new career opportunities. If your company has any openings, would you be willing to take a look? I looked directly at them, unwavering. The same people who once didn't hesitate to cast me aside were now cautiously searching for a place in the shadow I had built. At first, I replied evenly. Every position is earned by demonstrating skill and commitment to our core values. There are no special considerations for personal connections. No harsh words, no heavy tone. But in Haley's and my mother's eyes I could see the confusion, the helplessness they couldn't hide. Mark stepped back as if realizing every door he hoped to lean on had been firmly closed. I nodded politely, keeping my composure until the end. I hope you, Haley and Mark, enjoy the evening. Then I turned and walked steadily toward Patrick waiting at the bar, without looking back. Behind me the past wavered, but ahead of me stretched a vast, open horizon. A horizon I had carved out with my own hands, my own heartbeat, fueled by resilience and pride. The jazz music continued to hum as I returned to Patrick. He welcomed me with a quiet, knowing look, as if he understood everything without needing to ask. I took the glass of wine he offered and quietly clinked it against his, amid the bustling crowd. As the sweet warmth of the wine touched my tongue, I realized something. In that moment, I was completely, utterly free. Free from old expectations, free from the wounds I once clutched as part of myself. Free from the need to prove to my mother, to Haley, to anyone, that I was enough. I didn't need their validation. Truth was, I never had. The evening wound down, guests gradually trickling out with laughter and warm congratulations. As the golden lights dimmed and the live band packed up their instruments, Patrick and I stepped out onto the rooftop balcony. But Chicago stretched out beneath us, glittering like a galaxy fallen to earth. Patrick draped his arm over my shoulders, pulling me close. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft and warm. I rested my head against him, feeling his steady heartbeat, the same unwavering faith he had always placed in me. "I've never felt lighter," I whispered. The night breeze swept past, carrying away the last remnants of broken hopes. I thought of my mother,